a few notes of things to talk about, but
I have no idea really. I think we should just wing it, so this can be like a test of how we can do this.
Yeah, we probably don't actually want to show anybody this because it's just gonna be you and me, just
Just
two weird guys.
Well, yeah. Let's see. I haven't prepared all that much really.
No, me neither. I just jotted down a couple of things.
So I'm using like the boilerplate for Cerebral, and I actually updated it. So that was a good thing. At least one good thing coming out of this session is that I updated the boilerplate with the latest versions, and I also added. Oh, you're not seeing my screen now, are you?
No.
Let me. Oh, my computer.
That was actually one thing I wanted to talk about, was the getting started stuff.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a good.
What exactly?
So I got a little like copy and paste script thing going, kind of like we talked about, where you could maybe just copy it to your clipboard. Mm-hmm. And if you just pasted it in, it would go grab the latest zip from the repo.
Oh yeah, that stuff. Yeah.
CD into the directory. Actually, it might be fun if I could paste it in here. If you can just try it, just to see if it works.
Yeah, cool.
For you. But then I got the Cerebral website going on my computer and was going to try and make a pull request with like the button, to do it. Mm. But then I couldn't figure out how to get a button in Markdown. I don't think it's possible. And then furthermore, to like hook up a signal off of that button click. So I kind of just wanted to talk to you about that too. If we wanted to still go that way with like give someone a one-click install button experience.
Like the Cerebral site has most of it is Markdown, but like the front page and like the header, I can open the page. Let's see.
Okay.
So the header up here is React, and this front page is normal React.
Okay.
But all the other stuff is Markdown. So what we could possibly do is make it part of
I was going to do it in install and just delete everything on the install page and just put a button that says click this, and then you're done.
Yeah. Yeah, we can, but then so we just have to implement like a normal React component.
A normal view, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Where you can try to, we can have it on the front page too, maybe. But
that might be good.
Yeah, so what you could do is like implement it on the front page, because that's a normal React component, and just create a pull for it.
Start there.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Let me just see if this works for you. Let me paste it in here. Okay, now do we have chat in here?
That's a good question.
We normally do.
Maybe I can do it on the Cerebral.
In normal, or maybe in the, in there, yeah.
Ooh. So I just copy paste this into my terminal.
And just trust me.
Okay. Test. And then.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good idea.
Sweet npm. That's some crazy stuff. Are you using npm 3 or npm 2?
Yeah.
3? Yeah.
Not at work, but on some of the side stuff.
Yeah.
On the latest node, which it seems cool.
Yeah, I've just been having some problems
No,
getting used
really?
to. Yeah.
I was so excited because it just like worked the first time I did it.
But I think it's mostly my own fault because I don't quite understand like when I get these pair dependency
I know.
thingies, then I just don't understand quite how to read them. But I've had issues where I run npm install and then I get some errors about pair dependencies, but then I just run it again and then it works. So there's definitely something not right there.
Oh man, back to regular node land, where this stuff doesn't work and then you just do it again.
Yeah.
It just magically works. Or you just remove your node modules and try it again.
Yeah.
And it magically works.
Yeah. I'm wondering about, have you heard about JSPM?
Mm-hmm.
And they have a different approach where you kind of like, you have a file that just tells you all the dependencies and how they're connected, and you can just tweak it.
Right there.
Yeah. So you have a much clearer, because that's a problem. You can't see the dependency tree. You just get errors when it's wrong.
You just get errors. Yeah. It's interesting in Ruby, like what they have is their packager is a bundler.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have like your bundle file, which is where you list all the things you want to install, and then that generates.
Oh my god, that was awesome.
Okay, so it just worked. Huh?
It just worked.
Great, awesome.
Oh, that was really cool. And it even opened the browser and.
Yeah.
Oh.
It just takes you right to it.
Yeah. Can you make it open the debugger too? Auto install the debugger and open the debugger. That
Maybe.
would be. Oh, but that's really cool.
Okay, I'm glad that worked.
Yeah. Oh, I did get.
Oh,
yeah, because I'm already running the boilerplate. So, but it did work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Oh, that's awesome.
I think now that one, I don't think it inits a new Git repo, but we could have it do that if you wanted to.
What do you mean?
But I just left that out. So it just like pulls down the zip.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But it doesn't like, so now if you look in that test directory, like you'll see that it isn't.
Yeah.
There's no Git.
I think that's a.
So I don't know if I was thinking maybe the user might want to do that themselves if they want to start a new repo and do an initial commit, or we could do it for them.
Yeah, that's a good point. Often I find myself in the situation where I've already created my repo and then I just want to push in some like
a commit.
Yeah, some boilerplate stuff. So like using a boilerplate and creating a repo has nothing to do with each other really.
Right. Yep.
So that's my experience, but maybe
maybe we'll leave it then.
Yeah, I really like this. This fits my scenarios at least.
Yeah, cool. That's what I was thinking too.
Yeah.
Awesome. So maybe if you like it, I could open up a poll and try and get that in the website.
Yeah.
Now it's probably convenient that we both are on Mac and probably similar versions of everything. Like this isn't very robust at all, but I'm kind of thinking if we just get it out there, right, people will find out what's wrong, and people who know more about Bash or like who know more about this stuff than me will help out.
Yeah. But yeah, we should probably say it's like install for Mac, and maybe we could have like a disable button for install for Windows, and then hopefully someone wants to enable that button.
Someone will do that. Yeah, that's a good idea. Tease them with a disabled button.
Yeah. But that was really cool. I tried like other libraries where you have or frameworks where you have like copy paste to get going, but not like actually launching a boilerplate and running the framework in like a demo app. That's crazy stuff. Really, really cool.
Awesome. I'm glad. Yeah, it's just like they're taking away any resistance, right? To like, this seems interesting to this. Now I can play around with this.
Yeah.
Like remove as much friction as possible.
Yeah, because I don't think I have any. Yeah, we're not building like distributed files for. I was thinking about JSBin or something.
Mm-hmm.
But I think actually it's better to have this kind of thing, because then you open your favorite editor and we want to give like a real example, not put everything into one file, but actually you can see the file structure and stuff like that.
See how everything's wired up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's kind of fun because I put in the router in the boilerplate, So when you start it up now, it you see in the URL, it redirects to red, and then when you change the colors here, but when you change the color up here too, then it changes to
cool.
Yeah, that's actually really cool.
That is really cool.
And that's because of the latest change where you just convert the URL to a payload, and then it just magically works. So and you can
it's the natural end game of the URL as input. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of fun.
That's really cool.
Yeah, so I don't know where we should start. I have some questions. I had one question myself. Matthias, I wonder if he sounds very Swedish. Matthias Nilsson. He has some really good questions. And then you have are you hinting to like Falcor and PouchDB and stuff?
That's all my brain thinks about.
Yeah. But maybe we can start out by talking about how you handle like other kinds of events than interaction.
Like I view them as being related. Like if you think about like where Cerebral came from, you know, and like what's happening now, and it's like, you know, so it started out in the context of Flux, right, and like help me handle client-side state.
Yeah.
Then like things are still progressing now, and now it's almost like the next iteration of that idea is like, how do we handle not just client-side state, but like all of our state, including like all of our data and data fetching. And like the two things that I see with that is like, you know, all the data fetching stuff like Relay, Falcor, all that, or like push technologies, which is like WebSockets, Couch, and even just observables more generally. So I feel like those are like the two big things that Cerebral, like we need to figure out, like how do we handle that, because they weren't really around right when you first launched the project. So now I feel like they're becoming more and more important. So like those are kind of, I see, maybe you see it differently, but those are like the two big things, the two big question marks for me.
And that's a really good point. And we had this test project with Falcor, and I suppose the biggest problem is like Falcor has its own like state store, and the same with like PouchDB. Of course, it's a database, so it has its own state store. And none of them are like PouchDB. I'm not too familiar with PouchDB. Is it using local storage or something?
It uses IndexedDB, or it can fall back to WebSQL, I think. But but I think it could use, I think you could storage too, but like, you know, IndexedDB is more performant and there isn't like a size limitation like local storage. So, but
is it using like local storage is using strings? So in that sense, it's actually immutable, because every time you put something in, you have to take it out first, and then so it's immutable in that.
I think it's like JSON at least. I think. Right. Let me see.
Because that's also an issue. Like in Falcor, it's not immutable, but we want it to be immutable.
I know.
And and just to state that the reason we want it to be immutable for the first thing is that we have time travel debugging, and that's impossible to do without immutability. And we're also using the strategy where when we check if the components should update, we do that with shallow checking, and we also need immutable data to do shallow checking. So there are other strategies for checking if the component should update, but since we wanted immutability for time travel debugging, then
you can kill two birds with one stone. So
or
I kind of want to ask you what you thought about that too, because it's like, obviously when trying to handle the data thing, like when you throw immutability into there, it makes it harder to integrate with either Pouch or Falcor.
Yeah.
So it's like, so I kind of want to ask you too, like, I think the Cerebral debugger is awesome, and getting like a log of all the state changes, is really huge. But I don't think I've ever once found myself actually use the time travel feature where it's like I go back and then I change my action and then replay so that I go to an alternate universe.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's really cool, and it's cool with the immutability that you get that kind of for free, But like I found myself, because when I'm trying to do this integration with Falcor, like, but then you won't do that. But then I started asking myself, like, well, why do I really want that? And I just kind of was wondering what you thought about that.
Yeah, when I first saw it in Elm, the time travel debugging, it was like, that looks awesome. And that was the reason I wanted to do it. And then I learned about immutability, that you had to do that to make time travel debugging. But the really, really cool thing I got out of it is recording, that you actually can record the state of your application. So, but not all applications need that functionality. But I think it's one thing when I get to work a bit more on it, it can be a really, really cool feature. So if you build a service and you want to show your users how to do stuff in your application, then you can actually do that by replaying the state. So you can actually show inside the service how it actually works. So you don't have to have like an overlay with a video and all that stuff. And you can do support. You can like control. I don't know.
Like someone has a bug report, right?
Yeah, so they have recorded.
Pull up their session and replay and observe the error.
And you could even like do this under the hood. So like you were always recording, but at certain points you would just do a snapshot, and if something wrong happens, then it will just send in the previous recording automatically. So the user doesn't even have to like report the problem. So and this might be a huge thing, and it might not, but at least on the project I've been working on, it's been like it has to work like that. And so, but I totally see your point, because I don't know if I ever use time travel debugging, to be honest. It's cool, but no, but the really good thing with the debugger is how you get an insight into how your code has been running without actually reading code. And that was like the second thing I wanted to do, is like give insight into your code. Because if you compare it to like the Redux debugger, the Redux debugger also gives nice information, but it only states the last actions and what is your state right now. It doesn't tell you all the stuff that happened when the last interaction occurred. So it just gives.
And it's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And see, for me, like that right there, what you just said, is like the killer feature of Cerebral. It's kind of like what you talked about in your talk, is that it actually makes it explicit. It shows you all the stuff that's actually happening, and like, I feel like that's a really great like design decision, because then it's like everything is there, and the only question is like, how do you abstract it if you want to? But it's all there if you want. And it's like sometimes you really need it all to be there to make sense of what's going on. So we can argue all day about what abstraction to put on top, but the fact that it's there and there's like a predictable way that you express these state changes is huge. And like that's the sweet spot. Like for me, I feel like anything else in Cerebral could change, but it's always going to be Cerebral if that logging of those actions are there, and like the way we pipe everything together with like the signals thing.
And I think that might be the way the project is heading. Like with now we're getting these really powerful state handling or state storing libraries and fetching data and stuff, but you still need an abstraction that can handle complex state changes.
Yeah, exactly.
Because like I saw the last project I looked at was called, it's from Heroku. Have you seen it? React Refetch.
Like the fetching stuff.
But you're still only fetching one piece of data. I didn't read all of it, but that was my impression. It's like, okay,
it's like
really
sticking your Ajax calls in your component and wiring them together.
But then you get to situations like your situation from the presentation was extreme, but there's so often I get into a situation where I want to fetch it like this if state is whatever, or do this or do this, and fetch this and this, but if this fails then do this, and there's
I mean, it seems like that situation is insane, right? But like, to be honest, like anyone who actually needs to do OAuth, like that's what you have to do.
Yeah.
Like, there's really, like it seems crazy, but that's just because you're making all the stuff you need to do explicit. But like anyone who's actually doing it, like you need to do all that stuff.
Yeah.
You need to store a token, you need to verify it, So that's what I love about Cerebral, and like I think it's just really interesting, like, and it's not like Cerebral's behind in this way, but I think anyone who's doing stuff, fluxy kind of stuff, is trying to figure out the same thing. It's like, okay, so we move to the single state store and we get control of our client side state, and now it's like the way forward is like, no, like we can't just like, in order to really get control of it, like we need to touch like the back end too and solve like the actual fetching problem itself in a unified way. And like the problems it's trying to solve are like so real, right? It's like I just want my components to say what data needs to show up in this component, like, and I don't want to fetch more data than that. I want to cache that data. I don't want to do something silly like what we do with Backbone, which is like, I'm never really sure what the state is and it might get outdated, so I'll just fetch everything again just to make sure it's up to date. And then the big thing that really, the even bigger problem, probably, unless you're on like a mobile device, is like the relational data piece, which is like when I have this data that has relationships to each other and the syncing problems that come with that. Like right now in Cerebral, it's like, we can kind of do it with computed, but it's all left up to everyone, each developer, whenever you launch a new, it's like one of those things where like everyone is solving the same kind of thing, but you have to solve it every single time, and it's still like easy to get wrong. I feel like with computed. So that's what really made me excited about the Falcor thing, because they have their graph thing, and they're like, this is a big problem. Like the problem is that you have graph data and you're modeling it with trees. So like do it this way. But then the pain of integrating that new world with what we have now with the single state stores is, like you like Falcor take care of that data, but now it's like I need to take my single state store in Falcor and I need to
But I think you have
them together.
I think you have a point there. Like now we're trying to, one example is trying to fit Falcor. Where should Falcor fit in with Cerebral? Maybe we should turn it around. Like Falcor is like the new thing, and how can Cerebral fit in with Falcor instead?
That's kind of where I've come to. So it's like, and I don't know why I was so hung up on this with Falcor. Is like I kept thinking like, oh, okay, but this is only for like data fetching or something like that. And I just got that stuck in my mind when I finally realized like, no, wait, all I need to do is falcor.get and pass it a path. And it'll just stick that in the local cache, like just like Boabab, right? And like anytime you request it, it will just grab it. Or if it's not, it will do its call to the router and we'll get that. But the pain there, like kind of like what I was saying in Gitter, is like your get is never synchronous.
Yeah,
And like
exactly.
if you look at the way we wire up Boabab with Cerebral React, right, it assumes that there's always a synchronous get to where you can take that data and then bind it to your component.
Yeah.
So that's the question for me. So it's like, I think we could very easily just have our one model be Falcor, and any client data you just store in there, but I haven't been able to figure out how to hook it up to React. And also, like, I don't want to lose any of the Cerebral stuff either.
Yeah, the biggest problem is the synchronicity there. Like we will probably have to do like some relay kind of stuff, like where you, like all the components are wrapped with some kind of decorator who wants to grab the state.
Yeah.
But then you kind of like have to, because all the state is grabbed synchronously, from all the components, they trigger one after the other. So what we could do is like, okay, let's fire off all these getters in all the components and let them extract the state they need. And then when they're done, then we start the rendering of the components. So
yeah, what I saw happen was some people like wrote like a mix-in, just called queries, and each component just defines, this queries method.
Yeah.
And then the parent will just go through and will ask its children, any child components, hey, give me your queries, and then it will call a union on them to dedupe any of the queries, and we'll just bunch them all together and then say, Falcor, go get me that. So I actually found a project where someone did this. Let me paste it in here.
Yeah, that's cool.
They actually did it on statics, which kind of seems cool, but like I don't see why it needs to be a static method. Like it could just as easily be on the instance, the component instance, I think. Let me see if I could paste this in here.
There we go. Oh, that's the model.
So if you see, yeah.
Here you got recipe list.
So there's like statics queries. So you define a recipe query and an ingredients query. And these ones, like he just calls the component static by name, right? Like name.queries, ingredients.queries. But I think if it's not a static method, like we could just do this.children, right? And say, give me all the child, like loop through each child component instance and say, do you have a queries method? Okay, let me call that and get the query.
Yeah, maybe. Well, I'm not really sure if you could do it. I think it would be easier to like expose something on like the context, so that you can just because so you would rather say something like this dot add query or something, or maybe it would be better with a wrapper, like a decorator, which wraps, which holds the query itself and has access to something outside the components, has to control it. So the question is, how does that thing outside the components go into the components and grab the queries?
Right. So my idea for that was like just a method on each of the child instances, and then call this children.query method to grab them all and kind of batch them together. But what you're saying is use a decorator. But I think the thing is like you just want this top level root element that says all the queries in this componentry, let me concatenate them together and then go get them and then pass them down, right?
So I'm not sure the best technique for doing it, but the idea itself sounds really cool. Isn't
that so? Yeah, I mean, and so it's like then with this, like you get so many things. Like each component can just care about the query of whatever data it needs. And when you want to change like what that component, needs to render, you just change the query right in that component.
Yeah.
Or change it anywhere, and then all behind the scenes, it's just batching all that up to give you your data. And so many other things you get too. You get caching for free. So if you've already fetched this data in the component tree and you add another view that has it, you don't need to wire up your Ajax request, right?
But how would you like? My biggest concern is how you mix client-side state with server state. So let's say you want to grab like a list of to-dos, but on the client you have added some extra state to them, like if it has an error or if it's loading or whatever state. And then what you do is I just don't understand how you mix and match, because you can't have them inside each other anymore. You have to have your client side state someplace, and then you have to have your other state somewhere else.
I think maybe you could do a, like your Falcor data, kind of like your raw, maybe just like an Ajax, right? It's like you have your raw Ajax JSON data, and then everything is derived from that. Maybe, I don't know, I haven't totally thought this through, but maybe we could try and do a similar, like derived data sort of thing, where, I don't know, because it's all living in Falcor now, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's it's kind of, and
but if you keep them,
and you also want, like, how do you handle if you want to, you build up all the queries and 50% of it is client side state, and you just want to and that doesn't need to be fetched from the server, so you want to display that instantly, but then you have kind of like you're getting some other state from you're just getting all the other state, and then you want to render once for all the client side state, which is available right there, and then you want to do the fetch, and then you want to render again when that fetch is done. But would it handle that? Because it doesn't differ from go fetching and actually looking at what's already in the client. It's all just one request. I don't know.
Yeah, I think like optimistic.
Yeah, for example.
I think that's all. I think Falcor handles all that. Like, the whole, like, if it's in the cache, let me show it, and then let me go fetch and then update.
Yeah.
I think that's all. I think Falcor itself, like, internally will handles that. And it handles errors too. And you can, like, specify where you want errors to show up on the values and stuff. I guess, so this is another, like, to bring this more back to Cerebral too, is like, it's like the awesome thing about Cerebral is it shows us everything that's going on, and then the only question is like, what abstractions do you put on top of that? So you think of like least risky, least invasive to like most risky, kind of most invasive. Like the easiest thing is like wrap it in a function, right?
Yeah.
Like a factory. Like, remember your joke, like, oh, there's a factory for that?
Yeah.
Like, that's like your first thing you can do. So it's like, we see this stuff happening all the time where it's like, okay, I click a button. Now I need to optimistically update this thing. Then I need to perform this request. Then I need to handle if it's an error. Then I need to update the store. Like how many times do you do that? So it's like the easiest thing to do is like, oh, let me create some sort of factory to handle that sort of thing. And then it's like, if you think like, I kind of view like this Falcor stuff as just like kicking that up to the next notch. So it's like, if we were to do this and push it down to a model, or even a notch up from there is like a service, kind of, right? Where the service can do a bunch of stuff, and then you just hook into that service, and like, it's no longer your concern to wire up every single detail in Cerebral. And like, almost to another thing, like, think of how much stuff is going on in Boabab that like, we don't care about.
Yeah, that's true.
I can set this and get this thing, and I have all the insight that I need.
Yeah.
I kind of view Falcor as like, I feel like once we figure this out, it's going to be a similar thing. It's going to be like, oh, remember when like we had to optimistically update this and then do this and and wire that up on everything. Oh yeah, we made it a little bit better with this factory thing.
Yeah.
Or like if we figure out a way to push it down to the model, and it really is as simple as like, let me get this thing, let me set this thing, then it's like, how awesome is that? You know?
Yeah, that's really. Yeah, I'm really excited to see when this stuff gets into some really good examples. Because one of the other concerns I have is that if you have something that handles, for example, what you're talking about now, like optimistically create something, then fetch from the server, set an error there or a success there, then that's how it's going to work every time. But then suddenly you want to do something else. Maybe you don't want to talk to the server right away, or like with all this offline stuff we're going to do, and it's like with all these, every time you wrap something, then you say that this is how it's going to work, and you can't change that without creating something next to it. Or what I mean is every time you wrap something, then you say this is how it's going to work. And that's a good thing, because then you don't have to think about how it works, or you don't have to implement everything. But then again, if you wanted to slightly work a different way, then you're basically, you have a problem.
But don't you think, like, I feel like maybe I just need to see more examples, but I feel like Cerebral gives you more than anyone else those tools to be able to slide stuff in before or after, you know? It's like, if you want to, then you can add whatever you want to do in the action before you do that get. And then like you can wrap, once you do that get, you can have your different outputs to do different things. Now maybe like if you can't get in there to change the output or to add different things in that output, maybe that you need, maybe you give up that flexibility. But
and I think it should be, ideally it should be a choice. So that was like that was something I thought a lot about, because there's lots of stuff in Cerebral that could be like wrapped to make things easier, but now you have the flexibility to wrap whenever you want. Like there's a factory for that, and we also have these add-ons which potentially could expose, like we can just choose an Ajax library, and then we can just expose a get, post, whatever, and you can maybe pass it some options or whatever, and then you can make that choice to, you just want to hide that complexity away, but you can at any point just expose complexity again if you need to. So, and I think that's really hard to do, and people have so many different opinions on what is the level of like abstraction.
But the good news though is that it's not like Cerebral is taking anything away from anyone, because it's like, if you want ultimate control and flexibility, then just, you know, use XML HTTP requests or whatever and go wild, you know, and write a setter for each thing, you know, and do your request. And you can do that, you know, and stick it in the store. And if you want more stuff, then you could crank up the abstraction with some factories or with the add-on, or maybe once we figure it out, if it pans out to be a good idea, go all the way for like the model kind of thing, the PouchDB model or Falcor model package.
So, and I think it's kind of fun. It's been really fun experimenting and just playing around with the idea of where does all this stuff fit in. Like, is it a service? Is it something outside? Should it be like its own model package? for Cerebral, or as we're talking about now, maybe we should remove things from Cerebral instead, and then attach what's unique about Cerebral onto Falcor instead, if that's even possible. But I think it will be an ongoing discussion until you figure it out, Brian.
I don't have much hope for myself, but I'm hoping smarter. Like, I'm looking around everywhere, like I'm looking, like, people are trying to do the same thing with Redux, and like some Angular people are trying to do it. And at least, like, there's been some activity on the Falcor issue about it, and like the Falcor team and Jafar finally piped in and were like, like, we know this is a tough problem and people want to do it, and like, so it's on their radar. So hopefully there'll be some nice integration points.
And I think I have, like, I'm a bit locked in my perspective on how this stuff should work, because I want to define all my state outside my components. I don't want my components to decide what state should be available to them, and that's just a mindset I've been having, and I need to really work on that to embrace this idea of, okay, don't think about like your state as a whole, just create your component, define what state it needs, and then something else will just take care of it.
Right. It's not too crazy though, like, because when I was playing around with this, I was like, so I could move everything just into the signal chain, right? And I could fire some event that will be like, fetch data, right? And then I could have an action for each, thing that I need to fetch, and then set that, and then it gets passed to the component. And like, it could all live as, those functions over kind of like in main.js Cerebral land. But you can move those queries onto the component and define them there. But like, in reality of what's happening, it's not that much different, you just kind of move them onto the component and have some wiring that's going to go grab them. And
do you know how you would set your default state? You would still, in Falcor you would set that in the cache in Falcor. So like, you tell one component says I need an awesome state, but you have to,
which you are,
and then you have to like initiate your application with either that being true or false somewhere. So you can't just, your components, like if the state is being fetched from the server, then the state is in the database. But if whatever state you're defining in your components is only client side, you also need to define the client side.
Yeah, I think whenever you instantiate the Falcor model, you can pass in the cache to sort of prime it or give it the initial value from there. So I don't think that should be too bad.
Yeah, that's true.
It could even be sent over from, if you're doing some sort of server thing, like send over your serialized state or whatever and grab that and hydrate the client cache with whatever that state is and start from there.
And I also, did you see, is it called David Nolan, the Closure script guy with Ohm Next?
Ohm Next.
Yeah. But there I got the sense that when you define your component, you would actually set also the initial state, like some client-side state, and that would be synced up to the global state store. So it was just this thing in between your server and the client, and it would synchronize any state defined in your components into the global state store, and it would synchronize any state you try to grab from the server to that global state store. I'm not, I might misunderstand it, but it's kind of interesting. So you don't have to really it's like you define your UI part and you define your server part, and it will just merge it together.
It will sit in between.
Yeah.
Say become one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then you have like the question of, okay, if two different components are defining the same state, and one of them says it should be true, initially true, and one of them says it should be initially false, and then how does it merge it? Does it?
What do you do with that?
Yeah, stuff
like
that.
Last one wins.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, but it's certainly like it seems so old to have like a typical CRUD API when you see stuff like Relay and Falcor. It's
I mean, unfortunately, the ones that might have the clues of what to do are a little hard to bite off and chew right now. It's like Relay is the solution, like from Papa Facebook, in JavaScript land, but it's their implementation of the ideas, and it is more of a framework, and it's all in with that and nothing else. And then you have Om Next, which is ClojureScript, which is like, I can understand when he's talking about the ideas, but when he starts walking through the actual implementation, I can't follow anymore, and that's kind of why I started with Falcor, because it's maybe like in between, but the integration points there are painful. And like, I guess the reason why I care about this so much is because, like, for me, it's like my personal interest is that at my work, we have a bunch of Ember apps that use Ember data. And my agenda is like, I want to rebuild at least like one of our apps in Cerebral. And I want to bring it in and I want to say, hey guys, look at this. This is so much better, and have everyone agree. But like, in order to do something like that, like, not a couple things can't just be better and a couple things just the same, or like a couple things better and a couple things a little bit worse, In order to do something like that, like literally like everything needs to be better. Yeah. And like nothing can be worse than it is. Yeah. So I think this is why it's my personal like agenda, is because like, even though Ember doesn't have, like, even Falcor and Relay are like even beyond where they're at, but like at least what Ember does is it like takes care of caching, gives you like a central store to do all this stuff. It gives you, I don't like the API, but it gives you a way to be like, here's an object, here are the properties of that object, and I can, traverse through multiple like relationships and fetch those properties. Like, it takes care of all that stuff.
But and that's also like Ember that's like a hardcore framework like Angular, and but it's like when we got React, people were kind of confused, like, is it a framework? Can I, like, you can't really make an application with only React, you need something more. And when we got Flux, it was like, okay, cool, as you stated, also like taking care of your client-side state. But then what about asynchronous stuff? How do we do that?
And the next question is like, oh, Flux is cool. How do I fetch data?
Yeah, and there was like no real answer to it. And now we got Relay, and they got this is awesome, but how do I store my client-side state? So you always, none of them really solves everything. And they raise a lot of questions, really.
It's like, I mean, you always feel like you're just like one or two steps away, right? no matter where you are. Like, I'm sure like once you figured out Flux and you were launching Cerebral, you're like, oh, all I need to do is I need to get like a handle on these state changing operations. And then like, oh, if I have a debugger and I can see them, then game over. Like, that's all. You know what I mean? Oh, and once I figure out how I can like handle asynchronous actions and that, then like, oh, my life is gonna be so much easier. But of course, like, there's so much more to do, But I'm still like hopeful enough and naive enough that it's like, oh man, all we need to do is just figure out like how to fuse the state, the one state object on the client with this data stuff, and then, oh man, game over.
But things are really, I think we have to like stop sometimes and think about how are we doing stuff now related to like back in the good old jQuery days. It's like we can build stuff now that was impossible to build just using jQuery, for example. So it's really, really confusing, and it's like you always end up with lots of questions and why doesn't it handle that? How do I do that? But things are like moving along, and we are getting more, at least more powerful. We can do more awesome stuff than what we could before.
And that is exciting.
Yeah.
And like, I have no doubt, like, with Cerebral, like, I was just like, yes, this is better. Like I can do, you know what I mean? Like I can think about what's going on. I can organize stuff. Like this is better. Like you do encounter certain things like that. And I guess I kind of feel the same way about, when I watch like the Falcor talks and stuff like that. Like I had that kind of a similar feeling. Like if this can work, like, yes, this is better.
Yeah. And it's also, and I've also been, always been thinking about like scalability, and it's like a really nice word. I didn't understand scalability before, and I think a lot of developers still doesn't understand it because they haven't built large enough applications where it becomes a problem. But that has been like my I feel my mission. It's what I always want to solve is like when you build big stuff, you have to keep your mind at ease, or you have to be able to reason about stuff. And there's so many really, really, really cool implementations that looks really awesome, and they solve an important problem. But then you have 100 files containing different logic, and then you don't understand any of it.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I thought was really cool about when I started to like test the scalability of Cerebral. And you have this tool, and you just use the same tool for everything you want to implement. It's not like, okay, how should we solve this? How should we solve that? Maybe we should fetch some data in the component here, but let's make a service for that over there. It's like you have this one tool that it looks the same. It doesn't matter where you look in your code. It's the exact same tool doing all the work. And then, as you say, you have these abstractions and stuff, but it's the same concept. It's a signal, it has actions, and all that stuff. And that's the really hard thing to scale in applications. It's when you either have abstractions like typical models and collections, and then you get so many of them, and then they need to talk to each other. It's really, really hard to reason about when you get to a certain size. But
and I guess that's something that I ran into too, is like the problem with models is like you have these models that are sort of backed by these individual resources and endpoints, but then like these things have relationships, right?
Yeah.
And then that's where everything starts to fall down. Because then it's like I need to define these relationships on the client, and I need to change data and keep them all in sync, you know? And it's like the single state store is so obviously just like it's like, yes, this is so much better. Like put it all right there. Yeah. But then when you try and do real stuff, you're like, well, just because it's all in one place, like conceptually, that's when you get into the computed stuff and why it's still like experimental, right? Because it's still a pain to have these relationships and change them and make sure that they're all updated, you know?
And I think like in general, like relationships, humans are really bad at reasoning about relationships. So the more you can reduce relationships, I think it's easier to reason about. But then you get another problem, and that's like, okay, if your application is one file, but that file is like 10,000 lines of code, then you have like a problem again. And I think that's the exact balance. Like you want as few relationships as necessary, but you want many enough to be able to reason about each part, if that makes sense.
No, I think like going back to sort of what we were talking about when we were discussing this in the chat, it's like it's almost like starting top down, you know? It's like if I was making a GeoCities page in HTML, you know, and I was just writing like, you know, username, and you hard code a username in their picture and you put your picture in there or whatever, this little chunk of HTML. It's like working backwards from there with components, you know? It's like, what is the most direct way for me to just express what I want to show on this page and work backwards to the data fetching and the relationships and everything from there? Because really, it's like, it's not so much about this object model at the data layer. I feel like that's the key insight of like these next generation technologies. Is like, it's really all about what data do you want to show, and like how do we make it as easy as possible to show what you want to show in your view without errors, you know, without like this inconsistency and keeping everything in your head and being super careful to make sure that everything's in sync.
Yeah, and that is exactly what I think is the problem with, well, where Backbone has its limits. It's because the model represents the exact same thing as on the server.
As a resource.
Yeah. And then your application doesn't work that way. You want to fetch stuff from different places, and you want to like map all this state on your server into something that the client wants. And that's exactly what Falcor and Relay and all those solve, and that's a really good thing.
So it's like things are better now. Like if we were to do the same thing in Cerebral with computed, you know, like it's definitely better than the Backbone thing, but it's not that much better or not that different, because essentially you're still doing the same thing. It's like, oh, I have this key that has this data, I have this other key that has this data, I need to map over it, you know, and pull this out because my view wants to refer to it by this thing.
Exactly.
Like, I want to show this thing, you know.
But you do have kind of the same thing in Falcor. You have to explain Falcor how all the relationships are between the data you're fetching. I looked into some documentation on it. It seemed kind of hard to well, again, I don't understand the syntax, of course, so of course it's it's hard, but it's not like you get it for like you can never get it for free, it seems.
You can never get it for free.
So
what it does is it pushes, essentially it kind of cheats, because what it does is it pushes that stuff onto the router. So you define a router that says like, you know, any data that you're showing in your component is going to come from some path and some object. So you say where the path is of where I should be able to get this data, and then we'll make that request. And then it's the router's responsibility to say, hey, if I want data on this path, like here's how I go get it. And then Falcor has its own little internal rules about, you know, how you need to return that. So you go get your data, and then you have to like say what path this data is from, and then it does some kind of like Falcor thingy that I don't totally understand. You know, it does smart Falcor stuff to say like, oh, here are the paths, let me keep it all in sync for you. But you're totally right, like it kind of just pushes it onto the router and says you're responsible for fetching this data and for declaring what paths are at this data. And I don't completely understand, but if it works the way it says it does, like once you do that, like it does its Falcor magic to make sure that there's no, you know, duplicates, you know, everything has one, right? Pretty much everything we do already, right? By computed, like it just kind of does the same thing that computed does, but it's just the library does it instead of you manually mapping and doing everything.
Yeah. And it would be really nice to have some sort of API that, like, one thing is Falcor, but if we think about like the client, just in the client, something else that could, just because the problem is that you have some entity which you have one of that entity, and you want to use it many places inside your state, and something that would just allow you to just use it and just don't think about it.
Not have to say how to use it over and over again.
Yeah. It's a really hard problem to solve, because you also have this. You could probably wrap stuff in with methods, but the thing is, like, you want your state to be like serializable. And then you only have normal objects and strings and stuff to work with, so you can't wrap them in abstractions, because you want them to be completely plain, but then so you need some abstraction over them, which is not connected directly to to the object itself. It just needs to be able to reference it,
right.
But then if you lose the reference, then the abstraction has to know about the reference not being there anymore, and then
you're re-implementing Falcor.
Yeah.
Right?
It's crazy stuff. It's crazy stuff.
You're kind of queuing up like a mini rant that I had, which was like, we really, like, I love to do MVC, you know, like anytime I'm checking out something new, I'm like, to do MVC, please, to do MVC, please. Let me just like look at it to figure out what the heck is going on, you know? But like, shortly after that, it's like, man, like, you gotta move beyond, like, if so, like you're saying, like, so much stuff just falls down. Like, the second you want to do something, like, okay, let's do the to-do list, but let's just say each to-do can have a comment on it.
Yeah.
And each comment can come from a different user, right? So now all of a sudden you have this relationship, right? Many comments on the to-do, and a comment can belong to a user. And then say, we want to show in our UI a picture of everyone on this to-do next to it, that, you know, who is a part of this to-do, like who's commented on it, you know?
Yeah.
And it's like, just doing that, like, and you propose like the thing, like, okay, so what happens when one of those people who commented on it changes their picture? Right?
Yeah.
And you need to show this thing. So like, it's like, what do you do? Like that immediately like makes like 80% of demos or things like just fall down right there. Like the whole house of cards comes tumbling down. And like, is that really like an advanced thing? Like, no, not really. Like any real product that you work on is going to have to do something like that. And you need a way to handle that without wanting to pull your hair out, you know?
Exactly. That's a really, that's a really good point. It should be like to do MVC does handle some things, like a level of complexity. It would be nice to have like a list of like features, like it handles to-dos, but that's not like features. I mean features like handling complexity in applications. And it would be nice to like identify other complexities that are so common and just create a different application that can also handle that kind of complexity.
Yeah.
It's kind of
like that's how you approach things too. Like the minute you're evaluating something new, you're like, that seems really interesting, but I'd like to see what happens when I make an Ajax request.
Yeah. I've been playing around with Elm. And the first thing is like, okay, the to-do MVC example of Elm, it's one file. So, okay, what if I want to split up into different files? And then you have this concept of, you have like a mini framework inside Elm called Start App. And the Start App takes an update function. And that update function is basically where you pass in your actions. So there's an interaction and it triggers an action, and this is passed to the update function.
So update is your reducer?
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is that you can only have one. So it takes one function. And basically that means that you have to have all your reducers in one file. or you have to have one root reducer and you have to call. Well, basically what I mean, you have
to
like
a combined reducers.
Thing. So so that was my first the first thing I did. That there was to build like a combined reducer thingy. Because you have to have multiple update functions. You have to split your actions into different files, and or it just doesn't scale. But
so
then
did you have to build that?
Yeah, well, at least at my it's kind of, well, Elm is still pretty new, and there's not a lot of documentation on how to handle complexity. So I tried to build it myself, and after ripping my hair off trying to learn new stuff, it has nothing to do with Elm, it's just learning new stuff. I got it working, and so like now you can, I have this small boilerplate. I'm writing some articles on it now.
I know, I read your first two. Is there more coming?
Yeah, I think I'm actually working on a to-do MVC, like version 2.
Didn't you hear my rant?
Yeah.
It's such a huge achievement just to get to do MVC. Like I'm just kidding. I love it. I think it's great.
So, but anyways, there it handles, like, it's built up with multiple views and multiple files for actions, and you have data fetching and stuff that you really care about. So it will be exciting to see. But yeah, Elm is really cool, and you have to get over that threshold of learning new stuff, because you're so confident in what you're doing now and you can solve everything, like but now you have to learn a lot of stuff before you can solve it.
How are you feeling about it now, like as a language, a way of writing apps at this point?
What I think I really like about it is that I do not think about performance at all when I write code. Like, if I want to remove if I want to remove a to-do from a list, I actually filter on the existing list, and then I return false on the to-do I want to remove, if that makes sense. So instead of actually going into the array of to-dos and identifying, okay, where is my to-do, and then splice it out of it, I actually filter over the existing list, and then I just check, okay, is the to-do I want to remove, is it this to-do? And then I return false, which means it's taken out of the list. And that sounds really strange, but it's the functional way of doing it.
Yeah, it returns the new array.
Yeah, with all the other to-dos.
Right.
Yeah.
Not that one.
Yeah, but
so it makes a copy at that point. Like a smart.
Yeah. So
it returns the new filtered list.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So Elm does all this immutability stuff, but I think some of it is because you have to do stuff like that. So like in JavaScript too, when you do a filter, you get a new array. So there is like no splice method, I think, at all in Elm.
Makes sense to me. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but the point is that whenever I write JavaScript and I iterate over things, I always think that this is not the most performant way of doing it. But in Elm, I don't care for some reason.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah. I just do what makes sense.
Logically.
Yeah. So I think that's really cool. But then again, maybe I will hit like a threshold where things start to be slower, especially when rendering views, because there's no concept of should component update.
Right.
So, but yeah. So I still have.
It's kind of nice not to have to think about that, though.
Yeah, that's true, and that's actually, that is my point. What you're saying there, I'm so concerned about stuff in JavaScript, but with Elm, I'm just leaving it all to Elm. It just handles it for me, and it's a kind of a relief. but I have this thing in the back of my head. I do worry a little bit when I get to a certain level of
that it's all going to come crashing down.
Yeah. Exactly.
The free lunch is over.
Yeah. So, but
what's your experience with like the type checking and like those strong kind of smart types and stuff?
Yeah, it's like the some of the hype.
The compiler is supposed to be very friendly.
Yeah, and sometimes it is like when you do a typo, it's very friendly. But when you're passing, like when I built the combined reducer thingy, I didn't get any help from the type stuff, because sometimes it gives errors based on how it reads. Well, it always gives errors based on how it reads the code, but sometimes the error can be related to something else because of how it reads the code. So you might think it's the first argument, but it's really, well, you think it's the second argument, but it's really the first argument because of how the compiler reads the code. But you do get warnings about that. It might be this one, but it might also be that one.
Right. So it tries to be like, you're passing in the wrong order.
Yeah.
If it can, but not always, and then you're just super confused.
But like, to summarize, I just feel like instead of spending time in the console in the browser, I spend time in my terminal. It doesn't, because I still write the same crappy code. It's just I get different kinds of errors.
Is it faster though, like that workflow, than refreshing your browser? Or is it the same?
Well, it's kind of hard to say because I have this intuition after coding a lot of bad JavaScript.
Of what's wrong.
Yeah, so I don't have that intuition with Elm. So
that's true.
Yeah, so if that intuition was at the same level, maybe it would be faster with Elm. Maybe.
It's kind of nice to know that your chances of having something go wrong at runtime are pretty low if you make the compiler happy.
Yeah, and which
is certainly not the case with, you can make your change in JavaScript and everything's linted, everything looks good, and then oh man.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, and I think that happens a lot more than I notice. Which is kind of the point. It's like it should just work, but you don't think about it when it works. You think about it when it doesn't work.
Right.
So I think that's
always focused on the negative.
Yeah. But I think that's true. That I don't get any errors in the console. But then,
that's pretty amazing.
Well,
but I feel like you probably feel like it makes you work really hard. So I better not get any errors and deal with that.
But then again, you have I haven't done any asynchronous stuff. Like I have fetched some stuff from the server, but it's hard coded, so it always works.
Right. Yeah.
That's one thing, and I haven't used ports, like using a library in JavaScript and talk to it.
Right.
So that's probably a source for some issues.
Right.
So
see, one of the things that made me think about Elm was back at ReactiveConf when you were showing in your talk, the off example, when it was like, you cover this case, it makes you think about that, but you actually forgot this one. Like one thing I was thinking about, like not really completely understanding Elm, but maybe from what I've heard people say, is that if you encode like, it can be this, or maybe it's this, or like at the type, like the type system can make sure that you handle all those things, and the burden is like relieved from you just to think about it. Like, you know what I mean? Like you do an AJAX request and like it's wrapped in a maybe or whatever, which is like maybe it could return with this value, or maybe it will be this thing.
Yeah.
That seems pretty cool. Like, I don't know if it actually works out that way in practice, but...
Yeah, I'm not sure. I've been using like maybe now for doing an AJAX request. And what it basically does is, it converts the result to like a maybe. And the way you use a maybe value is to call a function called... maybe dot with default. So you try to set the maybe value, but then you have a fallback value. So it's I'm not sure if.
But that's kind of cool though, because it feels like it'll force you to do this thing that in JavaScript like causes a runtime error all the time. Which is like, oh, you expected to have this thing, but it's actually no.
Yeah,
right?
and you do get help.
You didn't think about a fallback, and now it blows up.
And you do get help, like if you try to use a maybe value where you shouldn't, like if you just try to insert the maybe value into like your state or your model, then you will get an error stating that, hey, you have to handle this differently because it's a maybe value.
You need to actually get the concrete value in there.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's kind of nice. So I can actually show you I have some of the. This should really be about Cerebral, but this is just a test.
In this screencast, you're already failing because there's way too much talking and not enough stuff moving on screen.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. We should have a podcast instead.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Welcome to Cerebral Casts.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay, you see my screen? Yeah.
Yep.
So I have like this app. This is like my. This will be like main.js really. Mm-hmm. So what I have here is like my initial view, which is a section with a class, and then and this is also a different concern. Like I have to pass in. Address is like signals in Cerebral. This is where you push your actions. And then you have the model, which is all the state of the application. And so you don't have like context in React where you can just access some global thing wherever.
Magically.
Yeah, you have to pass it down through. And that's like well, at least here you passed the whole model and this address thingy. So you don't have to like split up into different props. Like the props here is always the model. So you have access to everything everywhere. And personally, I really like that.
Yeah.
And then you have this start app thingy, which kind of like fires up your application. It fires it up with the initial model. And then you have this effects thingy. Which is also kind of cool. It works kind of like in, for example, Redux. You can dispatch actions, but you can also have a function, so you can do multiple dispatches. And it's basically the same thing, but instead of
like an action creator.
Yeah, action creator. But instead of having like effects. Are not part of like the action itself. It's more you return it from the reducer, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So a reducer normally returns the new state,
right?
But in this case, you also return possibly an effect. Yeah. So I can show you an example.
An effect is it anything like stateful or anything non-pure? Or is that wrong?
Yeah.
Wrong way of thinking?
I think it doesn't have to be... like in the examples I've seen, it fires up something called a task. I don't know
Which is kind of like a promise?
I don't know if it has to be asynchronous. Okay. But I think the idea there is that...
A promise doesn't need to be asynchronous either, does it?
Yeah, all promises are asynchronous. So even though you just return a value directly,
even if you return immediately,
it's asynchronous.
It's still put on like the task queue or whatever.
Yeah, so you have to.
I see.
You have to den it.
Right. Okay. Yep.
So, but yeah, I think Elm defines it, an effect as something that can fail.
Oh, I see.
I think. I'm not really.
Or wait, is that a task? A task is something that can fail.
Yeah, or maybe that, because you convert a task to an effect. So I don't quite understand the difference of an effect and a task, why can't you just return tasks? So yeah, I don't know.
Okay. Interesting.
So here is my combine reducer thingy. So I have like my to-do sections, and if we look into those actions, and this is kind of, and I'm really astonished how incredibly similar Redux is to Elm. But I don't think like Dan Abramoff, I think it was just a coincidence how these ideas kind of merged, and young Cheplicki, he was just doing this first, and you're not really doing any FRP here, like hardcore FRP. You're like firing off actions, and you reduce on some values. You don't do the cycle.js stuff here.
I was gonna say this isn't cycle.js.
Yeah. So that's also kind of interesting, because Elm is being talked about as this FRP library, and yeah, it has like FRP built in, but when you build an application like this,
it's not in your face.
Yeah, it's not there at all really. So what's really nice here is that you have like actions. You can just create them. You don't have to create a constant, which is
an
string.
And a string.
Yeah. Which is the same thing, like the name of the constant is the same as a string. It's
right.
It feels kind of weird. So
that's pretty cool. Yeah. And then these are types.
Yeah,
right?
These are types. So what you can do.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So what you can do is like in, for example, add to do here. Maybe that's a bad example. Let's take something more simple here. Okay. So this is like the footer. So at the bottom here, when I click the button, I call the address thingy, and I pass it the remove completed action, and I've imported that up here.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
So it's a lot less code than. So it's the same principles as Redux, but there's a lot less code really.
Oh, how do you get at remove completed there when all you imported was to-dos dot?
Yeah, that's this magic thing here. So I'm just exposing everything.
Is that like the what's it called? What is the ES6 thing? The 3-dot thing?
Oh, the spread.
Yeah, is it like, hey, blow it up?
Yeah, kinda.
Yeah.
Yeah, blow it up on the global scope of the file.
On the global scope, yeah. And just each of those keys or whatever.
Yeah. So so it is kind of cool.
Pretty nice.
And I kind of like the syntax where you update like objects. So an example, for example, here I have like this to-dos record or object, and when I want to update it, I just it's kind of like spread really. So I say, okay, I have this to-do. I want to create a new record, and it should be based on to-dos, but I want to change the list property, and that property should now be the new list.
Cool.
So I guess in JavaScript you would do something like this. Yeah, so you kind of have the same thing there.
And would that, in JS, would that return a new object? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, because you're adding a key to it. So.
Yeah. So, but the thing is, in JavaScript, if you do this, then you think like, copying over all the properties to a new object, that's not fast. It's like,
right.
Yeah, it's much faster to do.
To link to the new.
This is much faster, so I should do that. But then you're doing a normal mutation.
Right. So like structure, so like in memory, the whole list is already there.
Yeah.
And like behind the scenes, it just points to what was already there, but you can treat it as like a brand new value.
Yeah. So So it's actually with the new spread operator, it's really easy to treat everything in JavaScript as, or produce everything like, well, keeping it like immutable. So
Right.
yeah, so you can at least avoid mutations using the spread operator. But you have this idea in the back of your head that it's so slow compared to just yeah, but it really isn't. It's like, it's really strange that we have this micro optimization thingy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Well, that kind of struck me too, like when I was asking in chat the other day about should component update, you know, and Garth was like, yeah, just so you know, like it's only going to re-render in the virtual DOM, and if there's like no actual change between those, like it's not going to get patched to the real DOM to update, you know. So I'm like, yeah, so essentially what we're talking about here is just like an in-memory object comparison, right?
Yeah.
But it feels terrible.
It does. You know? It like, really does.
Like we don't even want to do the comparison, right?
Yeah.
We want to like short circuit that in should component update, and like we're willing to jump through lots of stuff just to get that, but it doesn't matter. Like I don't think so. Probably not.
And that's like where I want to go with the view, like rendering HTML. I don't want to think about performance at all. I just want to expose all my state. I want to use it, and I want to render when it changes.
And that's it.
Yeah, that's it. And I don't want to think about should component update and all that stuff. It should just work. That would be amazing.
Right. Yeah, to kind of loop back to what we were talking about before is like, you know, with time travel debugging and should component update, it's like, oh, we got to have immutability. But just, you know, kind of what we're talking about, it's like, well, at this point, like, I'd rather have something that lets me handle like relational data without errors and not overfetching and caching data, rather than like super fast should component update, or like being able to go to alternate 1985 when I'm debugging, you know?
Yeah, that's true. And well, that's kind of nice with Cerebral, at least, is that you do not really have to think about should component update.
I know, it's awesome.
Yeah, that's really nice, actually.
But when I was evaluating these other things, it like scared me.
Yeah.
If that was going to go away, you know.
But this line I've selected here is really awesome. This is really cool in Elm. So what I want to do is check if all the to-dos are completed. So what I do is that I use a function called all. So you have like a type list thingy, or like just like array in JavaScript. You say array.isArray, for example, called all. And then this completed here is actually something on my to-dos, like it's a property on my to-dos. But when I put a dot in front of it, it becomes a function. So it actually just, what this states is all the to-dos in this list, is the value true on the completed property.
Right.
And that's kind of crazy.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's really, really cool. That's also...
And I guess in JavaScript, they're trying to make that nicer with the arrow syntax, and like you can leave off the parens if there's just a single parameter to your function. Yeah. But this is nicer.
Yeah, it really... But again, in Elm, you have to be careful. You have to understand how... Like, you have to really know the signature of everything, because you very often have to close them in parentheses, stuff like that, because you very often need to compose functions, and then you have to close the arguments to the right function and stuff like that. But you also have this piping thingy, which is really cool, but I don't use it that much because it's new and I don't quite understand when and where to use it. But that's also kind of cool. I think I have an example in here you see it. So I have like this get function I have defined, and it takes a URL, a decoder. A decoder is just converting the response to Elm language so that Elm understands what kind of types there are.
Okay.
So this the coder just states like this is a JSON list of JSON string. So basically, it just tells Elm that it's an array with strings.
Okay.
And then I pass in the action to run when the response is being handled.
Okay.
So here it does the get, passing the decoder and the URL, and then it converts the. So this is what they call piping. I don't know if.
I see.
Yeah. So
that could be rewritten like effects.task paren task.map.
Yes, like this. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So that's really nice that you can do. And yeah, you listen to the React podcast?
Yes.
Yeah, and they talked about piping too, being suggested for JavaScript.
In JavaScript or whatever?
Yeah.
Dude, you're so ahead of the game.
Hmm?
You're so ahead of the game.
Yeah. So yeah, Elm is it's a big moment for me to look into a different language than JavaScript. I only know JavaScript, so
I know. I remember you were telling me that. Yeah. That's cool.
So that's really good. And
it's kind of cool that like you get to learn a new language in the context of like solving the same problems, like with ideas from that language already brought over to the language you know.
Yeah.
You know? So it's like, yeah, you have this new language, but like all the pieces look kind of familiar.
Yeah.
Like Redux or whatever. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, because I thought I wanted to explain Elm for a JavaScripter. And then I thought, okay, I heard that Redux and Elm, well, Redux had some inspiration from Elm, and then I just used that as a backdrop for the first article. And when I started, because I code and read up on stuff as I write the article, and then suddenly it just, what? This is exactly the same. It's it's really strange.
Like the entire universe can't be explained in JavaScript. That's what you're trying to say.
Oh well.
That's really cool. I mean, so do you think like you'll just kind of wrap up this series of articles and then kind of put it on the shelf and move on with your life, or has it kind of taken hold? Or
no, not really. I think I will finish it off with this to-dos example, and then I will leave it out there with some chapliki bait, and hopefully he will go in and he will just, why did you do this? Why did you do this? And this is too JavaScripty, and you should do it like this in Elm. And that's the big moment of learning, I think.
Right, yeah. You should totally like tag the Elm Bros. On it, because I think that's the kind of feedback that it seems like they're really receptive to, because they want it to make sense to JavaScripters, and they want to win people over. You know. So I'm sure if you haven't been won over, I'm sure that'd be like super valuable feedback as to like why. Yeah,
I think so too. And just trying to understand everything. They do have a huge problem with documentation. Like the documentation that's there is really great, but there's so much stuff to cover. And a lot of it is related to like too simple examples or stuff you really don't care about as an application developer, because Elm is also used for building games, and it's like so like I told you, I have no idea what effects are or tasks are. I just know I need them to do an HTTP request. So yeah,
it might be a little bit missing there. As to like why this core feature of this language, like why you should care.
Yeah, and one really annoying thing, which I don't understand why it didn't change, that's, let's see, I probably have some errors here somewhere. Let's see. It's when you get type errors, and the way they, I can just type it here. The way you define types is like, I want URL, it's a string, it's a okay, type of decoder, something, and an action. So the arguments, it's like the last thingy here is the return value. So these two are the, action, and it returns an effect action or something. Sorry. So the last thing on this chain is the return value, and that's really annoying. I wish it could be something like that. So you more, or even you shouldn't have arrows here at all, like something more like this. It just reads better, because it's just really hard to get your head around, because you feel
what
like,
is this return?
yeah, because this string leads to a decoder, leads to an action, which leads to, but that's not right. You receive these as arguments, and all those kind of like ends up in an effect. So
right.
yeah,
I see.
It's kind of weird, but
you need to file an issue.
Yeah, but I think it's inspired from somewhere else, Haskell or something.
From Haskell, yeah.
Yeah. So, and it's just a thing you have to get your head around. But that was really, really confusing. And it still is, because I just can't make I have to trick my brain. It's not like it's like
you have to mentally substitute an equal sign.
Yeah. Exactly. It's like, okay, in Elm, the color red is green. So whenever I see red, I have to think that it's green. It's
right. It's, a lot of work.
Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know, how much time do you have?
I have to get back to work.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
We never got to Matthias's questions, but this was just a test anyway. So
I think we did talk about computed state at least.
Yeah, a little bit. I think he wanted.
My answer is it's too hard right now, and we need a solution that will handle it for real.
Yeah, that's true in general.
Which is what we spent most of our time talking about.
Yeah.
It's like,
what should we do instead?
You know what I mean? I really feel like that's the thing. It's like, you think that this is your problem, or like you think this is the solution.
Yeah.
This is a solution to the problem.
Yeah.
I feel like
not the solution.
Yeah, it needs another solution, I think.
Yeah, and that's true, and that's how it is with everything. Like, now you had Angular, now we have Angular 2, because they have better solutions, and that's the way it will be with as I said, I will close up version 1 of Cerebral this Christmas, and then based on discussions on what we've been talking about here, maybe Cerebral version 2 will just be the signals. It won't have any state handling at all, really.
Right.
Maybe that will be, maybe it should be more like it works better. You can hook it onto like Falcor or Relay, or because that's what it's really trying to solve. It's not changing. It's not storing your state. It's changing your state. That's the scope of Cerebral.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, and the storing part is like a cool add-on almost. You know, but not the core thing, I think.
Yeah.
That's cool. Like, it's interesting that the only game in town really is Relay or Next. You know, like outside of that, everyone's trying to figure it out. It'd be so nice to make an impact there.
Yeah, that's true, and I think. Yeah, it would be cool to just play around with some of these core ideas. Like we talked about, how do you grab queries from your components and drag them up? How would you be able to define state in a component and it would be synced up to a global state? Just play around with those ideas and see if it's possible to do something.
Do you see that repo that I pushed up some stuff to? Let me paste in let me see if I can find it. what is it? Here it is. So I finally got a a working, to do with Falcor.
Oh.
And with a router and everything.
You did? Why didn't I notice this? So how? Okay, Falcor cache.
Oh yeah. So if you look at, I guess main, at main, and then the server, are kind of. So this is kind of just doing the dumbest thing, which is everything is just in actions.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Hard coded. But this would be a really good place to iterate. Like,
yeah.
Okay, how do we make this better? Like, get this down to a model, or pull some of these queries out declaratively at the component.
Yeah.
But it works if you run, and then if you look at the server, where is it?
Is it here maybe? Server.
Yeah. Cool. No. Yeah. So this is some bad code, but this is where you define the routes. So if you want to get the length of what the to-dos are, you define that route.
Yeah.
And this does the Falcor stuff to return the path and the value. And then it uses those the Falcor references, which is their thing that makes it a graph. So the good news is that it's all there. If you run it, it should be able to do things. But
yeah, because this is one perspective on doing it, and this is my initial thoughts too on how to do it. Like as you do here, you have it like you treat it like an Ajax kind of library.
Yeah.
And then because it depends like what you want. Like, do you want this single endpoint and make it easier to fetch data, but you still want to fetch it normal, like an Ajax thingy? Or do you want to go even further and then having these queries going straight from your components? And
once you taste it, you're going to want to go further. It's just like the minute anytime anyone does like Ajax, like REST-y kind of stuff, like in a project, like immediately you're just like, oh, let me write a factory, where I say get, set, and all that junk.
Yeah,
I think it's a similar thing. Like, like this is really kind of like, it's just like, what's the minimal thing that I can do to get it work in the world we have now, but it's not necessarily the world that we want to live in, I don't think. It's it's just like doing the request and then shoving it into the Cerebral store to bind to the component and update. So
it's a lot of wiring now.
Yeah, I know, but at least like it actually works, and when we talk about this stuff, we could work from here, to try stuff. And it took me a while to get it to work, so I'm glad at least something is working, and like I understand a little bit better of like what's going on with the router and the paths and like the Falcor specific stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's awesome. I will check it out and let you know if it doesn't run.
Okay, cool.
But I think it does. I believe in you, Brian.
You have faith?
Yeah, I have faith. Oh, but that's awesome. But it's really nice to talk to you. Just I think we can just sit all day and talk about code.
I think so. Yeah, but.
So maybe for our next session we should be a bit more strict, I think, with specifically with the questions from other people. Oops.
No, what we're gonna do on here is we're gonna talk about what I want to talk about.
Yeah.
But that's why this is practice, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, but I will wrap it up and put it on YouTube and share it with the others, and I hope we can do it again and maybe have some more people along. And
yeah, that would be great.
yeah, I think it's a good way to talk about stuff, not just me making video or somebody writing an article, but actually sit together and talk about stuff.
Yeah, it would be. Yeah, it's nice. It's nice to supplement GitHub issues and Gitter chat with just everyone talking and kind of let it go where it goes, because like stuff gets, I don't know, you can kind of like agree on something, right, and go one direction fast when you're just sort of talking it out versus over discussions. It's hard to kind of change gears or to kind of like get a feel that everyone is excited about something like really quickly.
Yeah, exactly. So. Yeah, that's cool.
Cristiano Ronaldo. That's what I want to call you. I want to say welcome to Cerebral Cast with Cristiano Ronaldo.
I don't know what to call you, Brian.
How about idiot?
Then we figure out that we should call you. No, weren't you like the guy from Braveheart, or what was that joke?
That's right. Hey, we have very complimentary names for each other.
Yeah.
I call you Cristiano Ronaldo, and you call me William Wallace.
William Wallace, like,
yeah. I've been called worse things.
Yeah, me too.
We should get a JPEG going.
Yeah.
As Cristiano. Me wearing a kilt.
Yeah. Oh.
All right. Well, I guess I'll let you go. I have to do work.
Yeah. Good luck with that. And you're working tomorrow too, or?
I am. Yeah, I'm just taking off to travel on Christmas Eve.
Okay. Well, you have to say hello to Bonnie.
Yeah, I will.
Mm-hmm. And have a nice trip.
Maybe you guys can meet sometime.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Whenever you guys come to the US.
Yeah, because I think actually we have to get over there because I really want to visit the US.
Yeah.
That would be awesome.
I mean, Florida's probably not at the top of your list of where you want to go, but you know.
No, I don't know.
If you ever feel like, I don't know, sitting on the beach and, I don't know, sitting on the beach and thinking about Cerebral. That's what I do.
Yeah. That would be
how
awesome.
I can make my problems wash away.
No, but it's nice like being inspired by nature. It's like Cerebral also is like inspired by the human anatomy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of...
Only I had a brain.
Yeah.
Alright, well, I'll let you go. Have a happy holidays.
You too, Brian.
Okay.
Talk to you later.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Okay.